The wind howled across the cracked surface of the alien wasteland, carrying with it the faint scent of blood and decay. Sarya lay motionless amid jagged stones and brittle bone shards, her chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. Each inhale burned her lungs, a cruel reminder that the oxygen in this thin atmosphere was dwindling, just as she was. The sun, too close and too white, beat down without mercy, bleaching the desolate terrain of all color. The world had been left barren long before Sarya's clan had come to claim it, long before the war that had scattered them to the winds. But even in a land so empty, death had found her. It had come in the form of a rival clan's ambush, swift and merciless, and it had left her here, alone, starving, broken. Her black-scaled limbs, once the pride of her kind, now lay heavy as stone. Clotted blood streaked across her taloned fingers, not all of it hers. The memory of battle flickered at the edge of her thoughts like a dim, dying star. She had fought as fiercely as any predator should, tearing through their attackers with a savagery born of desperation. Yet it hadn't been enough. The cries of her kin, the furious roars, had faded into silence hours, or perhaps days, ago. She didn't know. Time was slippery now, a strange alien thing that no longer mattered. What did matter was the gnawing void in her stomach, a hunger so profound it felt as though it would hollow her out completely. It demanded she move, hunt, survive, yet her muscles refused to obey. Her golden eyes, slit-pupilled and sharp, stared blankly into the distance, tracing the undulating horizon. Something shimmered there, heat perhaps, or mirage. She couldn't be sure. The edges of her vision swam, darkness creeping in like a stalking predator. And then she heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind. Footsteps. Instinct snapped through her body like a whip, driving her to pull herself upright, or at least attempt to. Pain exploded in her ribs, forcing a strangled hiss from her throat. She gritted her teeth, her sharp fangs pressing into the flesh of her gums. The footsteps grew louder, irregular, their rhythm strange to her ears. Not the purposeful tread of a predator, nor the skittering scramble of prey. Something in between. Someone in between. The figure emerged over the crest of a distant ridge, silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. Sarya squinted, her vision wavering, trying to make sense of the shape. It was upright, bipedal, and draped in something loose and tattered that fluttered in the wind. Human. The word surfaced in her mind unbidden, an alien concept in and of itself. Her claws flexed involuntarily, digging into the ground as instinct warred with exhaustion. Humans were prey, fragile creatures, soft and slow, barely worth the effort of hunting. Yet they were clever, and this one had survived long enough to reach this desolate place. Why? The human drew closer, moving with cautious determination. Sarya's keen ears caught the rustle of fabric and the faint clink of metal. It carried something, several somethings actually, slung over its back and hanging from its belt. Tools, perhaps, or weapons. Weapons. Her muscles tensed, a feeble echo of the power she'd once commanded. She couldn't fight, not like this, but she wouldn't die without a struggle. The thought brought a bitter twist to her lips. Death was an inevitability, yet pride demanded she meet it with teeth bared and claws unsheathed. The human stopped several paces away, close enough that Sarya could make out details now. Its face was pale and angular, streaked with dirt and something that gleamed faintly like sweat. The eyes were sharp, a bright green that scanned the landscape before settling on her. It crouched, moving slowly, carefully, as though approaching a cornered beast. Sarya's nostrils flared, catching a faint but unmistakable scent. Food. The human carried it, and her body betrayed her, a low growl rumbling from her throat. The sound froze the human in place, its gaze locking with hers. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, to her astonishment, the human did something wholly unexpected. It smiled. "Easy there," it said, its voice low and steady. The words were unfamiliar, but the tone was universal. Calm, unthreatening. It reached into the pack slung over its shoulder, moving slowly, deliberately. Sarya's growl deepened, her claws twitching. The human paused, meeting her eyes again. "Hungry?" it asked, pulling out a small, round object wrapped in metallic foil. It held the object out toward her, then placed it on the ground and stepped back. The scent hit her like a blow, rich and tantalizing. Her stomach twisted painfully, and her body trembled with the effort to hold back. It was a trick. It had to be. No prey offered itself willingly. But the human didn't move to attack, didn't reach for a weapon. It simply crouched there watching her with an expression that was maddeningly unreadable. Curious, almost. Sarya hesitated, her mind a storm of conflicting impulses. Hunger won. It always did. She lunged forward, snatching the object with a speed that made the human flinch. Her claws tore through the foil, and she devoured the contents without hesitation. The taste was strange, unfamiliar, but it filled the aching void in her stomach enough to clear her thoughts, if only slightly. When she looked up again, the human was still there, still watching. "That's better," it said, almost to itself. It stood, brushing dust from its knees, and slung the pack back over its shoulder. Then it did something that shocked Sarya to her core. It turned its back on her and began to walk away. Confusion rooted her in place, her mind scrambling to make sense of the human's actions. Prey didn't behave like this. Prey didn't offer food, didn't turn its back on a predator, didn't... The human stopped, glancing over its shoulder. "You coming?" The words were meaningless, but the gesture was clear. It was offering something. Help? Companionship? She couldn't understand it, and that terrified her more than anything else. For the first time in her life, Sarya hesitated to follow her instincts. The human was a mystery, and mysteries were dangerous, but so was staying here alone with the scent of blood still clinging to her skin. With a reluctant growl, she rose to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her. The human waited, its green eyes calm, patient. Sarya followed. Sarya's claws scraped the barren earth with every step, the dry dust clinging to her limbs like a curse. She followed the human in silence, her golden eyes never straying from his back. There was a pull, some strange, inexplicable force that had her trailing behind him, step after step, even though every instinct screamed for her to strike, to turn back to the wasteland and claim her independence. But something in the way he moved, in the steady cadence of his steps, made her hesitate, made her want to understand him. The human led them toward a jagged mountain range in the distance, its peaks sharp and dark against the scorching sky. The land between them was an endless expanse of cracked earth, sparse vegetation clinging to life in twisted shapes. The air had a stinging quality to it, laced with the bitterness of something burned, something that had been alive and now was not. It reminded Sarya of her own clan, of the firestorm that had ripped through her home and left nothing but ashes. The thought tightened her chest. They hadn't spoken since the human had offered her the food. She had devoured it greedily, never taking her eyes off him as if to challenge him, to ask why he had done it. But the human had merely watched her, that strange, unreadable expression on his face. He had not offered answers. He had not questioned her. He had simply moved forward, guiding her along, leaving her to follow. She hated that she had followed. But it wasn't just hunger that had pushed her. There was something else, something deeper in her bones that urged her onward, a sense of obligation, or perhaps curiosity. Was that what this human was? Curiosity? Something new? Ahead of her, the human paused, lowering his pack and looking up at the towering cliffs. His shoulders were stiff, his face set, and Sarya could see the tension in his movements, like a predator who had just caught a scent too familiar to ignore. "What's the matter?" she growled, her voice rough from disuse. The human's eyes flicked to her, and for a moment she saw something flicker in them, something almost human. He hesitated, and she felt it, the weight of the moment, thickening the air between them. "Something's wrong," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "I can feel it." Sarya felt it too. Her skin prickled with the silent hum of danger, a cold shiver working its way down her spine. But it wasn't just instinct. It was something deeper, a primal awareness that whispered of death in the air, something more than the desolation of this forsaken world. Suddenly, a harsh cry shattered the silence, a screech that echoed across the vast emptiness, sharp and full of rage. It came from behind them. Sarya spun instinctively, her body coiling, ready to pounce. But the human, Jonah, had already grabbed her arm, pulling her back. His grip was firm, stronger than she would have expected, but she shook it off, her eyes scanning the horizon for movement. "Stay close," Jonah muttered, his voice low, urgent. The screech came again, louder this time, and was quickly joined by others. At first, Sarya thought it was some form of wild beast, but the frequency of the calls was wrong. Too coordinated, too deliberate. Her gaze narrowed. "It's them," she hissed. Jonah looked at her sharply, his brow furrowing. "Who?" "They're coming," Sarya growled, more to herself than to him. She had been in these kinds of situations before, had heard this sound in the distance. The sharp, jagged cries of her own kind. The predators, the hunters, who would never allow a traitor to live. They knew she had left, and they would not let her go unpunished. "Your people?" Jonah asked, his voice a mix of confusion and concern. Sarya didn't answer. There was no need to explain. She could already hear the pounding of footsteps, a heavy, rhythmic thud that rattled through the ground. "We need to move," she said. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't have time to soften them. She turned and started to walk, her steps quickening as the sound grew louder, closer. Jonah hesitated, looking back toward the cliffs. But then, as if sensing the urgency in her movements, he followed without question. They moved swiftly, the weight of the danger pressing down on them from all sides. Sarya's eyes darted to the distant ridges, her body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Her ears strained to catch every sound, every subtle shift in the air. The hunters would not be far behind. They had never been far behind. Jonah's breathing grew more labored as they traversed the difficult terrain. He was slower than her, but she didn't dare let him fall behind. The hunters would not care that he was human. To them, he was prey, and they would kill him without a second thought. "What are they?" Jonah gasped, his voice tight with strain. Sarya shot him a glance over her shoulder, her breath coming in harsh, shallow gasps. "My clan." She hesitated, then added, "Those who survived." Jonah's brow furrowed as he glanced back over his shoulder, as though expecting to see the creatures materialize from the dust. But nothing emerged, only the heat shimmer of the arid air stretching out over the wasteland. "And they won't stop until they kill me," Sarya finished for him. They reached the foot of the cliffs, and Sarya paused, scanning the jagged terrain for a place to hide. The hunters were close now. She could feel it in her bones. She had no doubt that they would be on her in moments, and if they caught her out in the open, there would be no escape. She turned to Jonah, her golden eyes flashing in the dimming light. "Climb," she ordered, pointing to a narrow crevice in the stone wall. Jonah didn't hesitate this time. His hands scrambled for purchase on the rough surface, his face taut with concentration. Sarya followed him, scaling the rock with the effortless grace of a creature born to climb. But even as she reached the top and looked back at Jonah, a gnawing feeling twisted in her gut. The hunters weren't far, and then, from the edge of the cliffs, she saw them. A group of her clanmates, their silhouettes stark against the fading sun. There were 4 of them, tall and lithe, their forms flickering in and out of the heat haze. Sarya's heart pounded in her chest. She knew them. Akara was among them, her rival, her accuser, the one who would never allow Sarya to live. Jonah had reached the top now, and he froze beside her, following her gaze. His eyes widened in horror, and his mouth opened as though to speak, but no words came. Sarya didn't answer. She had no answers for him. She only had the choice to run or fight, and with Akara's eyes already fixed on her, she knew that running would not save her this time. "We have to move," she whispered, her voice tight with the raw tension of the moment. But as she turned to go, her foot slipped on the loose rock beneath her. And in that moment, as the ground gave way beneath her, she knew, whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The world tilted violently beneath Sarya's feet. The ground gave way, and her claws scraped the stone as she lost her footing, her body skidding downward. She let out a strangled hiss, instinctively reaching for the nearest hold, anything to prevent the inevitable plunge into the abyss below. Her claws sank into the jagged edge of the cliffside, and she managed to arrest her fall just in time. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline coursing through her veins like fire. Every instinct screamed for her to climb back up, to escape the threat below. But before she could gather herself, a scream tore through the air, a cry of rage, unmistakable and close. Ikara. Her rival stood at the top of the cliff, her silhouette dark against the dying sun. The unmistakable outline of her lithe, predatory form was a living nightmare. The sharp angles of her body, the gleam of her talons in the waning light. She was everything Sarya had once admired, and everything she had turned her back on. Ikara's golden eyes locked onto her, burning with an intensity that could sear flesh. "You!" Ikara's voice was a guttural growl full of venom. "You betrayed us, Sarya. You betrayed the clan." Sarya's muscles coiled, her body trembling with the weight of the decision she had yet to make. Ikara would never let her live, not with the mark of traitor branded on her like an open wound. Sarya's gaze flicked downward, her claws dug into the stone, but the cliffside was crumbling, eroding with each passing second. She needed to make a choice, and she needed to make it fast. "Climb now!" Jonah's voice snapped through her thoughts, sharp with panic. His hand was outstretched toward her, his face tense, his green eyes wide with fear. She had forgotten him for a moment, lost in the storm of her past, but now she remembered. He was her only ally. She couldn't let him go. Not yet. With a snarl of frustration, Sarya wrenched herself free from the cliffside, leaping upward with the raw force of desperation. Her talons found purchase on the jagged rock, and she pushed herself back toward Jonah, reaching for his outstretched hand. A moment of weightlessness followed, an endless stretch of time where every muscle in her body screamed, her claws aching with the strain. She could feel Ikara's eyes burning into her back, could hear the anger in her rival's breath, and yet, she kept climbing, her will and her pride pushing her forward. "Almost there," Jonah's voice, low and urgent, snapped her back to reality. She felt his fingers grasp her wrist, pulling her upward with surprising strength. She let herself be pulled, her body gratefully surrendering to the human's help. A moment of weakness she would later regret, but for now it was all that kept her alive. As her feet found solid ground, she collapsed beside him, panting with exhaustion. The air felt thick in her lungs, each breath a struggle against the weight of what she had just escaped. But there was no time to rest. Ikara was still above them, and the others were close behind. "We need to go," Jonah said, his voice trembling. He glanced nervously over his shoulder, scanning the cliffs for any sign of pursuit. His face was pale, his body rigid with tension. Sarya nodded, her golden eyes flashing with something that bordered on fury. She couldn't outrun Ikara, not like this. Not with the weight of her choices catching up to her, but there was something in Jonah's eyes, a vulnerability, a raw, desperate trust that made her pause. "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before she could stop it, her voice sharp with the edge of confusion. Jonah met her gaze, his expression softening for a moment. Because you're not what they say you are." He hesitated, his gaze flicking downward, as though searching for the right words. I think you're more than a predator." Sarya stared at him, her mind whirling. She could smell his fear, feel the tremor in his pulse, and yet, beneath it, there was something else, something she couldn't name. "More than a predator?" she growled, the words thick with disbelief. Jonah nodded slowly. "Yes, there's more to you than just killing. You've shown me that. and I can't turn my back on you now. Not after what you did for me." Her mind recoiled. "I did nothing for you," she hissed, the words bitter in her mouth. "I don't owe you anything." "But you're still here," Jonah replied quietly. "And that says more than any of your words." Sarya opened her mouth to retort, but the sound of movement from above halted her. She had no time for this. Ikara was coming. Without a word, she turned on her heel and began to move swiftly toward the deeper ravine below, urging Jonah to follow. "Stay close," she said, "and don't make a sound." They descended quickly, Sarya's movements fluid and practiced, her eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of an ambush. Jonah, to his credit, kept up, though his breath came in ragged gasps. She could hear the voices of Ikara and the others echoing down from the cliffs, but they weren't close enough yet. Sarya's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the chase settling heavily on her. As they moved deeper into the ravine, the ground became more unstable, a labyrinth of sharp rock faces and uneven footing. The air smelled of salt and decay, and the walls seemed to press in around them, the shadows thickening. Sarya paused for a moment, glancing around for a place to hide. A low growl rumbled from the distance, and she knew they were too close. "They're coming," Sarya muttered, her voice tense. "We need to—" Before she could finish, the ground beneath her feet trembled, and the world around her shifted. A low grating sound, like rocks grinding together, sounded from deep within the ravine. Sarya's eyes widened in alarm. Something was moving beneath them. Without warning, the earth cracked open, a deep fissure yawning wide in the ground. Sarya's claws dug into the stone as she barely managed to leap back, avoiding the sudden drop into the dark pit below. "What the hell?" Jonah shouted, his voice tight with panic. The ravine was splitting open as though the very earth had turned against them. Sarya's eyes darted back toward the cliffs. Ikara was nowhere in sight, but her rival's voice still carried on the wind. The stakes had just escalated, and now there was no place to hide. "Stay low," Sarya hissed, grabbing Jonah's arm and pulling him toward a narrow ledge to the left. The ground beneath them trembled again, and the gap between the rocks widened, sending a shower of debris crashing down. Jonah's face was pale, but there was no time to comfort him, no time to explain. Sarya's world had just tilted, and she could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on her, forcing her to move. A loud screech echoed from behind, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping rock. Ikara had found them, and now they had nowhere to run. The ground beneath Sarya trembled once more, the violent fissures widening, threatening to swallow them whole. The sharp sound of stones scraping and grinding echoed through the ravine as though the very earth was rebelling against their presence. It was as if the planet itself had chosen a side, and it wasn't hers. She pulled Jonah closer, her claws digging into his arm with a grip that was almost too tight. He didn't protest, his face pale, eyes wide with disbelief, but he followed her without question as she moved toward the narrow ledge on the left. The rocks beneath them groaned in protest, and Sarya could feel the tremors inching ever closer. A jagged stone slid loose from the cliffside and tumbled into the abyss below with a hollow crash. "We don't have much time," she muttered, her voice tight with urgency. "Keep up, human." Jonah didn't need to be told twice. His feet scrambled over the uneven terrain as he struggled to keep pace, his breath ragged with fear and exertion. Sarya's senses were on high alert, every nerve crackling with the tension of the chase. But even in the chaos, she knew one thing for certain. Ikara was close. Too close. From somewhere above, a harsh cry pierced the air. Ikara. The sound was filled with both fury and triumph, the unmistakable cadence of a predator closing in on her prey. Sarya's heart rate quickened, her eyes darting to the sheer drop just ahead of them. They needed to move faster or they would be trapped. Sarya glanced over her shoulder. She could just make out Ikara's silhouette on the cliffs, her slender form darting between the jagged rocks. Sarya's stomach tightened. Ikara had always been faster than her, stronger in ways that Sarya had never been able to understand. It was that same relentless drive for dominance that had made Akara a fierce rival, and now it would be the very thing that threatened her life. Sarya pushed herself harder, her claws scraping against the stone as she propelled herself forward. Jonah was still behind her, but she could hear him struggling. She felt a pang of something unfamiliar, guilt perhaps, or something worse, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Not now. Not when the stakes had never been higher. "Jonah!" she snapped, her voice strained. "Move!" He didn't reply, but Sarya heard his footsteps quicken as he pushed himself to keep up. The gap between them was closing, but just as quickly, the ravine ahead of them began to narrow. Rocks crumbled beneath their feet, and Sarya felt the earth shift again, this time with far more force. She turned just in time to see the ledge beneath her crumble away, sending a cascade of rocks and debris tumbling down into the growing abyss. "Shit!" Jonah gasped, his face twisting in panic. The ground under their feet was unstable, and the jagged edges of the ravine walls were closing in. Sarya cursed under her breath, her eyes scanning the cliffside for any escape route. But there was none. They were trapped, the walls too steep, the chasm too wide. And now, Ikara's voice rang through the air again, louder this time, more triumphant. Sarya felt a growl of frustration rise in her throat. She had fought for so long, fought to survive, fought to escape, but now it was all crumbling around her. The ground split wide, the fissures too large to jump, the gap between the two sides too great. The rumbles beneath their feet grew louder, a deafening roar that drowned out everything else. A shadow passed over them, and Sarya's golden eyes shot up. Ikara had jumped. The rival predator had leaped from the high ground above, her lithe body twisting midair, landing with an eerie grace just ahead of them, blocking their path. Jonah froze, his eyes widening with horror as he took in the sight of Ikara, standing tall and defiant. Her eyes locked onto Sarya, the hatred in them palpable. "Are you really going to run, traitor?" Ikara's voice was filled with contempt. "Do you think you can escape us forever?" Sarya's muscles tensed, her body coiling in preparation for the inevitable fight. But there was something in Ikara's stance, something that told Sarya this would not be a simple confrontation. Ikara was more than just her rival. She was the embodiment of everything Sarya had once valued in her species. Strength, power, dominance. And that was why Sarya had to stop her. Or else, the crushing weight of realization hit her like a slap. If Ikara won this, if Sarya allowed her to finish what had been started, she would never escape the past. She would never be free from the chains of her people's bloodlust. The very essence of who she was would be buried in the dust of her homeworld, and the bond she had forged with Jonah, fragile as it was, would disintegrate in the face of everything her species had taught her. Sarya's breath caught in her throat. Was this her breaking point? The moment when all her rage, all her pride, would come crashing down? Ikara smiled, a cruel twist of her lips. "You always were weak. Too sentimental for the ways of our kind." The words cut deeper than Sarya had expected. She had always known Ikara to be vicious, but hearing the accusation now, hearing it spoken like a fact, a truth, shook her in ways she couldn't describe. "You don't understand," Sarya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not about strength anymore. It's about survival, and I won't let you destroy it." Ikara laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "Survival? You're talking about survival after abandoning your own?" Sarya stepped forward, her body vibrating with tension, claws gleaming in the fading light. "I did not abandon them. I left because I refused to be a part of their endless cycle of bloodshed. They'll never stop until they have nothing left to take." Ikara's eyes flickered with something, uncertainty perhaps, or a flicker of doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a colder, more calculated expression. "Then I'll finish what they started. If you won't return to the fold, you will die alone." Sarya's breath hitched. She could feel the weight of Ikara's resolve pressing down on her. There would be no second chance, no more time for reflection. In this moment, one of them would fall. Jonah stepped forward, his voice shaky but determined. "You don't have to do this," he said, his eyes darting between Saria and Akara. "We can leave together. I'll help you both. Just stop fighting." Akara turned her gaze on him, her expression darkening. "Stay out of this, human. This is not your fight." Saria's instincts flared. She could feel the heat of the moment closing in, the battle lines drawn. Ikara's challenge hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. There was no more running, no more hiding. The time had come for her to face her past and her future head-on. "I'm not your enemy," Saria whispered to Jonah, "but I can't let her kill me." Jonah's eyes locked with hers, confusion and fear clouding his features. And yet, there was something else there too, a glimmer of understanding, the same understanding that had brought him to her side in the first place. He nodded, but his gaze never left her, the weight of his unspoken words thick between them. And then, in a single, fluid motion, Saria sprang forward, her claws outstretched, her mind consumed by one thought: survival. The wind howled through the ravine, a deafening rush that filled Saria's ears and rattled her bones. It carried with it the bitter scent of dust and decay, a reminder that they were on the edge of a dying world. Yet in this moment, that death, whether from Akara or the planet itself, felt like a distant thought, fading under the weight of the decision before her. She stood face to face with Akara, the two predators circling each other like ancient enemies, each poised on the edge of battle. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on, the last remnants of daylight casting sharp shadows against the jagged rocks around them. Saria's heart hammered in her chest, her claws flexing in time with the pulsing beat. The instinct to strike, to end this fight once and for all, was overpowering. Yet, as her muscles coiled and her eyes locked onto Akara's, cold, calculating, filled with loathing, Saria hesitated. Jonah's voice had been a whisper in her ear, soft and urgent, as he had taken a step toward her, a futile gesture of humanity's quiet belief in peace. "You don't have to do this," he had said, his words a fragile thread between them. But it wasn't peace that Saria sought. It was survival. A life free from the weight of her species' bloodlust, from the suffocating honor that had once defined her. A life where the brutal lessons of her clan no longer governed her every move. Her gaze flickered between Jonah and Akara. Jonah's wide, green eyes locked onto hers, his expression full of something she had never expected to see: trust. And it tore at her insides, a wrenching twist of guilt and confusion. Could she trust herself? Could she trust him? Ikara growled, her voice low and venomous. "You're weak, Saria. This human, he's the end of you. If you go down this path, you'll never be what you were meant to be." The words hit Saria like a slap, but they didn't sting the way they used to. There was a time when Akara's words would have been a call to action, a command, and she would have obeyed without question. But now they felt like the last vestiges of a past she was slowly shedding. "Maybe I don't want to be what I was meant to be," Saria said, her voice steady but low, the finality of her words ringing clear through the tense air. "Maybe that's the problem." Ikara's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "So, this is it? You've given up? You think this human will protect you? You're a fool, Saria. They will never accept you, not like we would." Saria's claws dug into the earth beneath her, a sharp crack of rock breaking beneath the pressure. She could feel the pull of Akara's words, the final temptation to return to her clan's savage ways, but something deep inside her, a quiet, steady force, pushed back. She had already made her choice. She could feel it in the very marrow of her bones. "I don't need your protection," Saria replied coldly, her voice steady now, free of the hesitation that had plagued her since the moment Jonah had first extended his hand to her. "I don't need anyone to define me anymore. Not you. Not them. Not anyone." Ikara's lips curled back in fury. She lunged. Saria reacted instinctively, her body a blur of motion, claws flashing like lightning. Her mind screamed, urging her to finish this, to take the life of the one who had tormented her for so long. But as Akara's form came crashing toward her, the thought of her actions, of the blood she would spill, stopped her. For a heartbeat, her claws hovered in the air, trembling with the weight of the decision. Jonah's words, his voice, echoed in her ears. "You're more than a predator, more than a predator." The thought was foreign, yet it settled inside her like a seed, slowly taking root. And then, with a swift movement, she struck, but not with deadly intent. Her claws connected with Akara's chest, just hard enough to send her stumbling backward, gasping for breath. Sarya stood still, her chest heaving, staring down at the enemy she had almost become. Akara looked at her, stunned. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the realization dawned. Sarya had spared her. "You ... Akara whispered, her voice a strangled rasp, disbelief written across her face. "You chose this?" Sarya didn't respond. She simply turned, her golden eyes meeting Jonah's for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She saw in his gaze the same question that had burned in her heart for so long. What now? And in that moment, she knew. She knew what she had to do. "Jonah," Sarya said, her voice soft but unwavering. "It's time." Jonah didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his hand reaching for hers, the bond between them as solid as the ground beneath their feet. It was unspoken, but undeniable. Two beings, once so different, now standing together, united in a shared purpose. The earth trembled beneath them once more, but this time, it was no longer a threat. It was a reminder that the world was not a simple place of predators and prey. It was a place of choices, of change, of survival, and for the first time in her life, Sarya was free. Together, she and Jonah climbed down into the ravine, leaving Akara behind, her rage still smoldering in the darkness. The landscape ahead was harsh and unforgiving, but Sarya's heart was lighter now, the burden of her past finally cast off. They didn't speak as they descended into the unknown. There was no need for words. The only thing that mattered now was the future they would forge, together, the one that would be their own. As they reached the base of the ravine, Sarya turned her head to look back at the broken landscape, the jagged cliffs, the endless desert. It was all fading, becoming a memory, a part of her. She had learned that sometimes to survive, one had to choose the hardest path, the path that asked for sacrifice, for change, for growth. And she had chosen it. For the first time, she felt at peace. The mining colony of Clythane 7 was a labyrinth of rust and shadow, a warren of dying machinery and forgotten lives. Its tunnels snaked deep into the moon's core, their walls weeping condensation, their air heavy with the metallic tang of iron and decay. Somewhere in the bowels of this mechanical graveyard, something stirred. Zara awoke to silence, the kind so thick it pressed against her chest, stealing breath she no longer needed. The cold was biting, clinging to her like a second skin. She lay still, her senses prickling, her fingers tracing the slick surface beneath her. Steel. The faint vibration of distant drills trembled through the floor, a rhythmic pulse like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast. Her head throbbed, a dull ache buried beneath layers of exhaustion. How long had it been since her last memory? She could recall only fragments, the searing flash of plasma, the crack of metal splitting in two, the screams of those she couldn't save, and then darkness. Zara opened her eyes. A pale, artificial glow seeped through the grates above, casting skeletal shadows on the walls. Her reflection stared back at her from the curved surface of a discarded pipe, luminous blue eyes, faintly glowing stark against her ash-gray skin. The sight was a cruel reminder of what she was, of the curse she carried. She stood, her movements slow and deliberate. Her joints protested, stiff from disuse, or from something worse. Her clothes were torn, streaked with soot and blood that wasn't hers. Her fingers brushed her side, where the faintest traces of a wound lingered, already healed. The pain was gone, but the memory of it lingered, sharp and unwelcome. The silence around her was wrong, Too still, too quiet. Zara tilted her head, listening. There, faint but insistent, came a sound, the scuff of boots on metal. She froze, her every instinct sharpening to a blade's edge. Someone was coming. Cassian Hale was used to the dark. He'd spent most of his life running through it, whether in the back alleys of corporate-run worlds or the suffocating depths of places like this. But the dark of Clythane 7 was different. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was a living thing, thick and oppressive, curling around you like a noose. He kept his steps light, his ears straining for sounds beyond his own. The stolen data chip burned a metaphorical hole in his pocket, its weight far greater than its physical form. He didn't know exactly what was on it, only that it was worth killing for. The governor's enforcers had made that much clear when they'd stormed his safe house earlier that day. Cassian's hand hovered near the pistol at his hip as he slipped through the tunnels, his breath visible in the frigid air. The further he went, the more the sense of wrongness grew. Something wasn't right. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he'd learned to trust his instincts. They'd kept him alive this long. And then he saw her. Zara's gaze snapped to the figure at the far end of the tunnel, a human male, lean and sharp-eyed, his dark hair falling in messy strands over his forehead. He froze when their eyes met, his hand darting toward the weapon at his side. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Don't," Zara said, her voice low, a warning. He hesitated, his fingers twitching, then slowly raised his hands, palms out. "Not looking for trouble," he said, his tone cautious, edged with something she couldn't place. Zara didn't lower her guard. "Then why are you here?" "Same reason as everyone else," he said. "Trying to survive." Her eyes narrowed. There was something about him. Something off. He didn't belong here, not among the dregs and deserters that called this place home. He was too clean, too deliberate, and yet there was a weariness in his posture, a weight that mirrored her own. "You're bleeding," he said, nodding toward her side. She glanced down, frowning. A faint line of crimson stained her shirt, the last remnants of a wound she hadn't realized was there. It was almost gone now, her body's regenerative process already at work. "It's nothing," she said, her tone clipped. His eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, and she could see the questions forming behind them. She didn't plan to answer any of them. "You're not from here," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Neither are you," he shot back, his expression guarded. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Touché." A sound behind them, distant but distinct, shattered the fragile moment. Heavy footsteps, the clatter of armor, the low hum of energy weapons powering up. Zara's eyes flicked to the man. "Friends of yours?" "Not exactly." "Then run." They ran. The tunnels twisted and turned, each corner a gamble. Zara moved like a shadow, her steps silent, her movements fluid despite the lingering pain in her side. The human followed close behind, his breathing steady, his focus unshakable. "Who are they?" she asked as they ducked into a narrow passage. "Enforcers," he said. "Governor's dogs, not the friendly kind." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "And you're running because—" He hesitated. "Let's just say I've got something they want." Zara didn't press. She had enough ghosts of her own without collecting his. They emerged into a larger chamber, the ceiling high and crisscrossed with beams of rusting steel. The sound of pursuit grew louder, closer. Zara's mind raced, calculating their options. "This way," she said, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward a hidden alcove. Cassian didn't resist, though his eyes flicked to the shadows like a man who had seen too many betrayals. As they slipped into the darkness, Zara's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure what unsettled her more, the hunters closing in, or the fact that, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. In the silence of the alcove, she caught her breath and risked a glance at the human. His eyes met hers, wary but steady. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated, the weight of it pressing against her like an old wound. Zara. Cassian, he replied. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then the sound of footsteps echoed again, closer this time, and the fragile connection between them was severed. Zara's hand tightened around the blade at her side. Whatever came next, she would be ready. The alcove they hid in was a hollow pocket of shadow, barely wide enough to fit them both. The air was thick, stagnant, carrying the faint tang of oxidized metal and ancient oil spills. Zara pressed her back against the cold steel wall, her breath steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. Across from her, Cassian crouched low, his pistol drawn and angled toward the tunnel entrance. The sound of boots echoed closer, their heavy rhythm punctuated by the occasional murmur of voices, distorted by static. The enforcers were methodical, searching each offshoot of the tunnel network with brutal efficiency. Zara closed her eyes for a moment, letting her senses extend into the space around her. The vibrations of their approach were faint, but she could feel them, a disturbance in the stillness, a ripple that grew sharper with every passing second. Cassian shifted, his gaze darting toward her. "We can't stay here," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of distant machinery. "And go where?" Zara replied, her tone calm but edged with steel. "Anywhere that isn't here." She opened her eyes and studied him. His face was drawn tight, his jaw clenched, but his eyes held steady, a flicker of resolve she hadn't expected from someone so seemingly out of place. She weighed her options. The human was right. Staying meant waiting for death, but moving without a plan could be worse. "We need to split them up," she said finally, her mind racing through the possibilities. "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Zara reached down to her belt, fingers brushing against the worn hilt of a compact blade. She pulled it free and held it up. The blade's edge shimmered faintly in the dim light, its alloy ancient and unyielding. "They're tracking movement," she said, her voice measured. "Sound. I can lead them off. You go the other way." Cassian frowned. "And leave you to play bait? That's a terrible plan." "It's the only one we have." He hesitated, his expression a mix of doubt and something else, concern. It didn't matter. Zara turned away before he could argue further, slipping out of the alcove with the silent grace of a shadow. The tunnels stretched endlessly, their narrow corridors branching and twisting in unpredictable patterns. Zara moved swiftly but deliberately, her steps light against the grated floor, her heart beat a steady rhythm, her breathing even, her mind focused. She let the enforcers catch glimpses of her, a flicker of movement here, the faint echo of a step there. She stayed just ahead of them, enough to draw them deeper into the maze. Her luminous eyes, a gift and a curse, caught the dim light and reflected it like twin beacons. She knew they would see her, she counted on it. The first shout came from somewhere behind her. "There, in the next tunnel!" Zara smirked to herself and quickened her pace, her muscles coiled and ready. The voices multiplied, the chase heating up, but she knew these tunnels better than they did. A sudden flash of light ahead stopped her short. She pressed herself against the wall, her blade drawn, her breath still. From the adjacent passage, two enforcers emerged, their visors glowing faintly with augmented optics. Zara cursed under her breath. They were better equipped than she'd hoped. "Fan out!" one of them ordered, his voice sharp through the static of his comm. Zara's fingers tightened around the blade. She could take them. She'd faced worse odds before, but it would cost her time she didn't have. A loud clang echoed from somewhere to her left, a deliberate metallic crash that shattered the tension. The enforcers turned as one, their weapons raised. Zara didn't hesitate. She darted past them, her movements a blur, her blade flashing once as she passed. The first enforcer crumpled to the ground, his leg severed at the knee. The second spun toward her, but she was already gone, disappearing into the shadows before he could fire. She didn't stop running until the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. Cassian waited. The chamber he'd slipped into was a forgotten corner of the colony, its walls lined with rusting machinery that hummed faintly with dormant power. He crouched behind a console, his pistol steady in his hands. The data chip in his pocket felt heavier now, its importance gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. He couldn't shake the image of Zara's face as she'd left him. There was something unsettling about her, something that went beyond her otherworldly appearance. She moved like a predator, but carried herself like someone bearing a burden too great for words. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. His grip on the pistol tightened, and he leaned out from behind the console, his breath shallow. Two figures appeared at the edge of the chamber. They weren't enforcers. Cassian's eyes narrowed as he studied them. One was a towering brute, with cybernetic implants glinting under the dim light, his arm replaced by a weaponized prosthetic. The other was leaner, his face obscured by a helmet that flickered with red sigils. "Spread out," the taller one growled. Cassian sank lower, his mind racing. These weren't random scavengers. They moved with purpose, their stances professional, their weapons military grade. As they split up, Cassian weighed his options. Fighting them head-on was suicide, but slipping past them unnoticed was equally unlikely. He glanced at the console beside him. A flickering display showed a series of switches and dials, their purpose long forgotten by the colony's inhabitants. Cassian reached out and pressed one at random. The chamber lit up with a burst of sound and light as an ancient alarm system roared to life. The two figures spun toward the source, their weapons raised, their movements sharp. Cassian used the distraction to slip out of the chamber, his steps quick and silent. Zara found him 2 corridors later. She appeared from the shadows like a wraith, her eyes glowing faintly, her expression unreadable. "You're alive," she said, her tone flat. "Barely," Cassian replied, his voice tinged with irritation. "You're welcome, by the way." "For what?" "For not dying. Pretty sure that would have made this harder for both of us." Zara's lips twitched, the faintest hint of amusement breaking through her stoic mask. Before either of them could say more, the sound of voices reached them again, closer this time. Cassian sighed. "They don't give up, do they?" "No," Zara said, her tone grim. "They don't." She turned to him, her expression serious. "If you have something they want, you need to tell me what it is. Now." Cassian hesitated, the weight of the data chip suddenly unbearable. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out, holding it up between 2 fingers. "It's a data chip," he said. "I stole it from one of Varla's personal vaults. Didn't have time to decode it." Zara's eyes narrowed as she studied the chip. Something about it felt wrong, an aura of importance that went beyond its physical form. "What's on it?" "No idea," Cassian admitted. "But if Varla wants it back this badly, it can't be good." Zara's jaw tightened. The tension in the air thickened, the weight of their predicament settling over them like a shroud. "Then we need to find out," she said. "And how do you suggest we do that?" Zara glanced down the tunnel, where the sound of pursuit grew louder with every passing second. "We survive first," she said. "Then we'll figure it out." With that, she turned and began moving again, her steps quick and deliberate. Cassian followed, his grip on the data chip tightening. Whatever secrets it held, they were about to become his problem, and Zara's. The air in the lower tunnels was heavy with moisture, each breath tasting faintly of rust and oil. Zara led the way, her blade drawn, its faint shimmer cutting through the dimness. Cassian followed closely behind, his pistol at the ready, the stolen data chip burning a metaphorical hole in his pocket. Every step seemed to amplify the tension between them, unspoken questions weaving a fragile web of mistrust and necessity. The tunnel split ahead, diverging into 2 paths. Zara stopped, tilting her head as if listening for something beyond human hearing. Cassian, his nerves fraying, shifted uneasily. "Which way?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Quiet," Zara replied sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. Cassian bit back a retort and fell silent, watching as Zara knelt to press her palm against the damp floor. Her luminous blue eyes flickered with concentration, scanning the shadows as if reading something only she could see. "They're spreading out," she said after a moment, standing. "We don't have much time." "What are they after?" Cassian muttered. Her gaze flicked to him, sharp and assessing. "You should know. You stole it. I didn't ask for an inventory while I was running for my life." Zara's lips twitched into something that might have been a smirk or a grimace. "That data chip. Whatever's on it, it's not just worth killing for. It's worth hunting through hell itself." Cassian was about to respond when a faint hum filled the air, a low vibration that set his teeth on edge. The walls seemed to tremble, the sound growing louder, more insistent. "What is that?" he asked, his hand tightening around his pistol. Zara's expression darkened. "Trouble." The source of the hum revealed itself moments later. A mechanical drone, sleek and angular, its frame bristling with sensor arrays and weapon ports, hovered into view from the tunnel ahead. Its red optics scanned the area with clinical precision, its movements smooth and deliberate. Cassian cursed under his breath. "They brought drones?" Zara's blade was already raised, her posture tense. Of course they did. The drone emitted a sharp mechanical chirp, its optics locking onto them. In the blink of an eye, its weapons activated, a volley of plasma bolts scorching the walls around them. "Move!" Zara barked, grabbing Cassian's arm and pulling him into the left-hand tunnel. The two of them sprinted through the narrow passage, the drone in relentless pursuit. Zara's mind raced as she calculated their options. The drone was fast, and its sensors were too advanced to outrun for long. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, its floor littered with broken machinery and discarded tools. Zara skidded to a halt, her eyes scanning the room for anything she could use. Cassian, breathless and visibly rattled, glanced at her. "What now?" "Stay behind me," she said, stepping forward. The drone entered the chamber, its optics flaring as it scanned its targets. Zara stood her ground, her blade held low, her body poised like a coiled spring. The drone fired. Zara moved like lightning, her blade slicing through the air in a blur. The plasma bolts deflected off the blade's surface, ricocheting into the walls with a shower of sparks. Cassian watched in stunned silence as she advanced, each movement precise and lethal. With a final, sweeping arc, Zara's blade connected with the drone's core, slicing through its armor with a flash of light. The drone shuddered, its hum faltering, before collapsing to the ground in a heap of smoldering metal. Cassian stared at the wreckage, his heart pounding. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." Zara ignored him, crouching over the remains of the drone. She pried open a panel on its side, her fingers deftly pulling out a small, glowing device. "A tracker," she said, holding it up. "They know exactly where we are," Cassian muttered. "Not anymore." Zara crushed the tracker beneath her heel, the glow fading to nothing. The chamber grew quiet again, the faint hum of distant machinery the only sound. Zara leaned against the wall, her eyes distant. Cassian noticed the way her shoulders sagged slightly, as if the fight had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. "What's your story?" he asked, breaking the silence. Zara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "My story isn't important. Funny, because it seems pretty relevant right now." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the hilt of her blade. For a moment, Cassian thought she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice low and measured. "I'm the last of my kind," she said. "The only one left after a war that wiped us out. My people were different, stronger. We had abilities the rest of the galaxy couldn't understand or control." Cassian frowned. "And that's why they're after you?" "Partly," she said. "But it's not just me they want. It's what I know." Her gaze flicked to the data chip in his hand. "What's on that chip?" she continued. "Might be the reason my people were destroyed, and if it falls into the wrong hands, it could happen again." Cassian stared at the chip, its surface unassuming, its secrets hidden within. "Great," he muttered. no pressure or anything. Their conversation was cut short by the sound of footsteps echoing down the tunnel. Zara stood immediately, her blade raised, her eyes narrowing. "They're close," she said. Cassian's grip on his pistol tightened. "What do we do?" Zara didn't answer right away. Her mind was racing, her thoughts darting between the immediate danger and the larger picture. The enforcers were relentless, and the secrets of the data chip were becoming clearer by the second. Finally, she turned to Cassian. "We can't keep running. We need to get off this colony." "And go where?" "To someone who can decode that chip," Zara said. "Someone I can trust." Cassian raised an eyebrow. "You trust someone?" Zara's expression hardened. "Not easily, but this is bigger than us." The footsteps grew louder, the sound of voices carrying through the tunnels. Zara met Cassian's gaze, her eyes steady and determined. "Follow me," she said, "and try not to get yourself killed." They moved quickly, their steps silent against the grated floor. Zara led the way, her senses sharp, her mind focused. Every turn felt like a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. As they approached the colony's outer perimeter, Zara slowed, her hand raised in a silent signal. Ahead, a large reinforced door blocked their path, its surface worn and scarred from years of neglect. Cassian frowned. "How do we get through that?" Zara smirked faintly. "Leave that to me." She stepped forward, her hand brushing against the door's control panel. The ancient machinery sparked and groaned in protest, but Zara's fingers moved with practiced precision, her touch activating something deep within the system. The door shuddered, its locks disengaging with a heavy clang. Cassian stared at her, equal parts impressed and suspicious. "You've done this before." Zara didn't respond. She pushed the door open, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor beyond. "This way," she said, her voice steady. As they stepped into the corridor, Cassian couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far larger than either of them had anticipated. The stakes were rising, and the secrets of the data chip and Zara's past were beginning to unravel. The corridor stretched on like an unending vein carved through the earth. Zara led, her pace deliberate, though her fingers twitched against the hilt of her blade. Cassian followed closely, his eyes darting to every shadow, the stolen data chip now a weight far heavier than its physical form. The door they had left behind sealed with a pneumatic hiss, shutting out the echoes of pursuit, but not the tension that clung to them. "We're running out of time," Cassian muttered, his voice breaking the silence. Zara glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Time isn't the problem." "What is then?" She paused at a junction, her gaze scanning the branching paths. "Every choice we make leads us closer to someone else's trap. The problem is whose it will be." Cassian didn't reply. His instincts told him to press her, to demand answers she seemed unwilling to share, but the intensity in her eyes warned against it. Instead, he followed as she veered left, her pace quickening. The passage opened into a chamber, unlike any Cassian had seen on the colony. The walls gleamed with intricate etchings, symbols and patterns that seemed to pulse faintly with their own light. A low hum filled the space, resonating through his chest like a heartbeat. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice hushed. Zara stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the wall. "A relic," she said softly, her tone tinged with something akin to reverence. Cassian frowned. "From your people?" She nodded, her gaze distant. "When the first settlers came here, they didn't know what they'd found. They built over it, mined around it, never realizing what lay beneath." "And you knew?" "I suspected." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Cassian saw a flicker of vulnerability beneath her guarded exterior. "The architecture, the symbols. This isn't just a relic. It's a piece of my world." Cassian's pulse quickened. "Does this have something to do with the chip?" Zara hesitated, her fingers tracing the glowing lines on the wall. The chip holds information, fragments of a truth buried for centuries. My people's immortality wasn't just a genetic anomaly, it was engineered, and the ones who engineered it didn't want it shared. Cassian's mouth went dry. You're saying this is about control? It always has been. Zara turned back to the wall, her expression hardening. And they'll do anything to keep that control. The hum in the chamber deepened, the air growing heavy with energy. Zara stepped back, her stance tense. Something's happening, she said. Cassian's hand went to his pistol. Good or bad? Zara's lips pressed into a thin line. We're about to find out. The etchings on the wall flared, their light intensifying until the entire chamber was bathed in a brilliant, otherworldly glow. The hum rose to a crescendo, and then abruptly, the light coalesced into a central point, a swirling vortex of energy suspended in the air. From the vortex emerged a figure clad in sleek black armor, its design alien yet terrifyingly efficient. The figure's visor gleamed red, its stance radiating authority. Talon Vorn, Zara said, her voice low. The figure tilted its head, its voice a smooth blend of mechanical distortion and cold precision. Zara, I expected you to run farther. Cassian raised his pistol, but Zara's hand shot out, pushing the barrel down. Don't, she warned. Talon's gaze shifted to Cassian, the faintest hint of amusement in his tone. A human? How quaint. Cassian bristled. Nice to meet you too. Talon ignored him, focusing entirely on Zara. You should know by now, Zara, that there's nowhere you can go where we won't find you. I'm not running, Zara said evenly, her blade gleaming in her hand. Talon's helmeted head inclined slightly. Brave, foolish, but brave. Do you even understand what you're protecting? What that chip represents? It represents everything you fear, Zara shot back. Freedom from control, the truth about what your masters did to my people. Talon's posture stiffened. Your people are gone. Their truth died with them. What remains is an illusion, a dangerous one that could unravel everything. And you think silencing me will stop it? It will delay it, Talon said simply, long enough to ensure stability. Zara's blade shifted in her grip. Then you've already lost. The air between them charged with tension, and in an instant, Talon moved. His blade, a shimmering serrated weapon of alien design, clashed against Zara's, the impact sending sparks flying. Cassian stumbled back, his pistol useless against the speed and precision of their duel. He watched, helpless as Zara and Talon became a blur of motion, their strikes echoing through the chamber like thunderclaps. Zara fought with the ferocity of someone who had nothing left to lose. Talon countered with the cold efficiency of a predator. Their blades danced and clashed, each strike a deadly symphony of light and sound. But as the battle raged on, Cassian's attention was drawn to the glowing vortex. Its energy seemed to pulse in time with the fight, as if responding to the clash of wills before it. An idea formed in his mind, reckless and desperate, but possibly their only chance. Zara, he shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Can you hold him off? She didn't respond, her focus entirely on Talon. Taking her silence as a yes, Cassian sprinted toward the vortex. The energy crackled around him, the heat searing his skin, but he pushed forward. The data chip. Everything revolved around it. He pulled it from his pocket, its surface gleaming faintly. If this relic was tied to Zara's people, then the chip might be the key to unlocking its secrets and turning the tide. Cassian, no! Zara's voice cut through the noise, sharp with alarm. Talon's head snapped toward him, a split-second distraction that Zara seized. Her blade struck, grazing his armor and forcing him back. Cassian reached the vortex, his heart pounding. Without giving himself time to reconsider, he plunged the chip into the swirling energy. The chamber erupted in light, a wave of force knocking all three of them to the ground. The vortex shimmered and expanded, its glow intensifying until the etchings on the walls seemed to come alive, their patterns shifting and merging. A voice filled the air, deep, resonant, and undeniably ancient. "The truth cannot be erased." Talon staggered to his feet, his visor flickering. "What have you done?" Cassian, still on the ground, stared at the vortex in awe. "I think I just opened Pandora's box." Zara rose slowly, her blade at the ready, her expression unreadable. "Good," she said. "It's about time." The light from the vortex coalesced once more, forming a projection, a map of stars and symbols that seemed to stretch infinitely. At its center was a symbol Zara recognized immediately, the crest of her people. Talon's tone was sharp with anger. "You've doomed us all." Zara's gaze was steady, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Number, you doomed us when you chose to bury the truth." The vortex pulsed again, and the map shifted, revealing a single point, a destination. Cassian glanced at Zara. "What is that?" She met his gaze, a spark of hope in her eyes. "A way forward." As the light from the vortex dimmed, the chamber fell into a tense silence. Talon remained motionless, his stance wary but unyielding. Zara sheathed her blade, her focus shifting entirely to the projection. The mysteries that had plagued her existence were unraveling, piece by painful piece. But with each answer came new questions, and the promise of an even greater fight ahead. For the first time in centuries, Zara felt the faintest flicker of purpose. The planet loomed on the horizon, its surface a swirling blend of crimson and gold. Zara stood at the helm of the battered starship, her gaze locked on the distant sphere. Cassian watched her from the shadows of the cockpit, the silence between them heavier than it had ever been. "This is it," he said, his voice low. Zara nodded. "The origin site, the place where it all began, and where it will end." Her words hung in the air, charged with finality. Cassian crossed his arms, leaning against the bulkhead. "You're sure this is what you want?" She turned to face him, her expression softened by a rare vulnerability. "It's not about what I want. It's about what's right. For my people. For everyone." Cassian didn't respond immediately. He'd seen Zara transform in their short time together, her stoic detachment giving way to a fierce determination. Yet, beneath it all, he sensed the same quiet ache, the weight of immortality and loss. "You don't have to do this alone," he said finally. A faint smile touched her lips. "I'm not alone." The landing was rough, the ship groaning as it pierced the planet's turbulent atmosphere. The air shimmered with energy as they descended, the controls crackling with interference. Zara's hands remained steady on the console, guiding them toward a jagged mountain range that rose like teeth from the desert below. Cassian tightened his harness as the ship touched down on a precarious ledge. "Remind me to never let you fly again," he muttered, wincing at the metallic groan of the landing gear. Zara ignored him, already unbuckling her restraints. "We're here." The air outside was thin and cold, carrying a faint metallic tang that prickled the skin. The ground beneath their feet shimmered with faint, golden veins that pulsed rhythmically, as though the planet itself were alive. "This place," Cassian whispered, his voice trailing off as he took in their surroundings. "It's a repository," Zara said, her tone reverent. "A vault of knowledge, left behind by the ones who came before." Cassian raised an eyebrow. "Your people?" "No." She shook her head, her expression distant. "Something older." The entrance to the repository was a massive archway carved into the mountainside, its surface etched with the same glowing symbols they had seen in the chamber on the mining colony. As they approached, the ground beneath them rumbled, the air vibrating with a low hum. Zara placed her hand on the archway, her fingers tracing the symbols with a practiced familiarity. A moment later, the stone began to shift, the symbols rearranging themselves into a spiral pattern that pulsed with light. The doorway opened with a resonant chime, revealing a vast interior that stretched into darkness. Cassian hesitated. "You sure it's safe?" "No," Zara replied. stepping inside without hesitation. Cassian sighed, his hand hovering near the blaster at his hip. Why do I even ask? The interior of the repository was unlike anything Cassian had ever seen. Towers of crystalline structures spiraled toward the ceiling, their surfaces alive with flowing streams of light. The air was thick with an indescribable energy, each breath filling his lungs with a sense of both awe and unease. At the center of the chamber stood a massive pedestal, its surface engraved with more symbols. Zara approached it slowly, her steps measured. "This is the heart," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The heart of what?" Cassian asked, his unease growing. "The truth," Zara replied, placing the data chip on the pedestal. The repository came alive. Streams of light burst forth from the pedestal, spiraling upward to form a holographic projection of the galaxy. The map shifted and pulsed, its intricate details revealing pathways, anomalies, and hidden systems. Cassian's eyes widened. "What is this?" Zara's expression was grim. "It's everything, the history of my people, their fall, and the secrets they died protecting." As the projection shifted, a voice filled the chamber, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Zara of the Eternal Kin, you have returned." Zara's jaw tightened. "And you've been waiting. We are the custodians, the keepers of what was and what could be. Your presence here signifies the tipping point." Cassian glanced at Zara. "Tipping point for what?" "For balance," the voice replied, "or for chaos." The projection shifted again, revealing a dark mass spreading across the map like a stain. Zara's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "The legacy of those who sought to wield immortality as a weapon. The destruction of your people was only the beginning. Their ambition remains, festering, and now threatens to consume all." Zara's hand tightened into a fist. "What do I need to do?" The custodian's voice was unyielding. "You are the last of your kind, the final key. To stop this, you must sever the link, destroy the seed of immortality embedded within you." Cassian stiffened. "Wait, what? You're saying she has to sacrifice herself," the voice finished. "The seed is the nexus. Its destruction will erase the corruption and restore balance." Zara's expression didn't waver. "I understand." Cassian stepped forward, his voice rising. There has to be another way. You can't just—" "It's the only way," Zara said, cutting him off. Her gaze softened as she looked at him. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, Cassian. Hope. But this is my burden to bear." Cassian's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to find some way to convince her otherwise, but the resolve in her eyes was unshakable. Zara placed her hands on the pedestal, the light from the projection enveloping her. The energy in the chamber surged, the streams of light converging on her as the custodian's voice intoned a solemn chant. Cassian stood frozen, his heart pounding as Zara's form began to dissolve into the light. Her final words echoed through the chamber, steady and unwavering. "Thank you, Cassian, for everything." The light intensified, blinding in its brilliance, and then silence. When the light faded, the chamber was still. The projection was gone, and the pedestal stood empty. Cassian fell to his knees, his chest heaving as the weight of what had just happened crashed down on him. But then a faint glimmer caught his eye. On the pedestal lay a single, crystalline shard, pulsing softly with light. He reached out, his fingers closing around it. As he held it, Zara's voice filled his mind, a whisper filled with warmth. "Live well, Cassian, and protect the truth." Tears blurred his vision as he clutched the shard tightly. Cassian emerged from the repository, the shard glowing faintly in his hand. The galaxy stretched before him, vast and infinite, filled with both danger and hope. Zara was gone, but her sacrifice had given him something he hadn't felt in years, a purpose, and as he stepped into the unknown, he vowed to honor her memory. to protect the truth she had died for, to ensure her story would never be forgotten.